This is a video overview, and you can find far more detail in the written manual following this presentation, which you can print out. Once again, thank you very much for buying this, and it shows certainly a determination on your behalf to try and handle something that is there and gives you the ability to do this. My name is John Donaldson, and I just want to help you. Congratulations once again on buying this Stop Creditors and Save Yourself manual. You know, the idea is how to get out of debt as soon as possible, quite frankly, or stop all these actions that are frightening to many people. And you know, I hope that you use the suggestions here and as quickly as possible. Few know what to do, and as a result can slide further into bankruptcy and ultimately lose their homes and businesses and even the family, which of course is a disaster. Many think that the law is purely there to persecute them, when in actual fact nothing could be further from the truth. I would mention two laws that are really can help you a lot. And you know, one is the license law that gives these people the right to operate. Another one is the Data Protection Act. Both these laws are designed actually to help us in many ways, and provided we use the laws and are legal ourselves, we in actual fact can make a huge difference to our situation and actually put the banks on the wrong side of the law. As promised, I want to keep this very tight. I don't want to have gallons of information, lots of padding. The object here is for you to get on with the job as quickly as possible, and the very first thing you should do is go along to the addendum at the back and modify the letter to suit your circumstances and send it off as soon as possible, so that you can immediately announce a dispute with the banks, which once that is announced, then you know you actually are on the right side of things. If you haven't got a dispute, you're completely open to their persecution. If you have got a dispute, they've got to stop everything. This manual has been designed to help yourself. The Consumer Credit Act of '74, amended in '03 and '06, says that it has been written to help the debtor, especially those of, you know, who have got a query or a dispute. And you know, whilst you've got that dispute on, as I've already said, you are in actual fact in a position to help yourself and stop them taking action. And the beauty is that if they continue to take action, they're then outside the law. And the glory of this is that they're so arrogant that they don't even take any notice of this. And the net result is they're miles on the wrong side of the law. And the more that they do that, in actual fact it's better for us, because we know that the legal situation is, when you read that act, that they can't do anything. That's the beauty of this whole situation. They can't do anything, because while you've got a dispute on, and a valid dispute, then they've got to stop. They can growl and threaten as much as they want to. They've still got to put a stop to it. And you know, there is a particular section of the Act, which I think is 2.8k, that says that when there's a dispute ongoing, they've got to stop all action. The Consumer Credit Act of '74 is the very act that gives them the license to operate. And if they continually, and it says that, and if they continually operate outside of the law, then they're in fear of proving themselves to be not fit for the job, and they can lose their license. So this is fantastic, because they're not allowed to do this. Secondly, as soon as you declare the dispute, they're not allowed to go and issue your name all over the place to other debt collectors, and that they often do as well. And you know, that puts us even in a stronger position, because immediately then they've broken the Data Protection Act. So you know, we are helped in so many ways in this whole situation. The Data Protection Act says, under the heading of the Consumer Credit Act Debt Collection Guidance, that's section 1 in the introduction, clause 1.2, this is what it says: where the Office of Fair Trading has evidence, we can take action to refuse or revoke the credit license of those concerned. This includes evidence that a creditor or debt collector or any tracing agents engaged on their behalf has contravened section 555 of the Data Protection Act of 1998 by knowingly or recklessly or disclosing or procuring the unlawful disclosure of personal data. See, it's against the law. But that's only if you've got a dispute, and that's why we've got to get a dispute. In a previous video, I've given you a whole lot of examples of Consumer Credit Act sections that help you, and I want you to go through that, and then of course through the Act itself. But the very first thing you've got to do, before you start getting educated into everything, is not spend weeks trying to do this, but identify a dispute. Now the dispute can be, for instance, interest overcharges. Boy, and I tell you what, I've found just about every account that I've gone to failing on that. So you can usually find at least £500 or £600 worth there, and that is a dispute. The other thing is, of course, is PPI, which everybody's disputing right now. That's another dispute. So if you've got PPI, raise a dispute on that, and that can be thousands of pounds that's coming back to you. But raise a dispute as soon as possible, and I can assure you that they are so busy that they won't actually get a reply out to you, which is also illegal, by the way. They're supposed to get a reply to you within 30 days. Also demand a copy of your credit agreement. They very rarely are able to supply it, and when you look at it, you'll find that in terms of 61 of the Act, which you've got a copy of here, they aren't able to supply a properly executed agreement, which means that the agreement is not enforceable. So there's a whole lot of things that you can do, and that's why I suggest you read through it. But immediately declare a dispute, and then send in the details afterwards, within a couple of days. But get that letter off declaring the dispute, because that immediately puts them on notice that there's a dispute and they've got to stop all action. But get then, within a day or two, just get the actual dispute details out. Just to rehash that 61.1, I'll read it to you again. A regulated agreement is not properly executed unless a document in the prescribed form, itself containing all the prescribed terms and conforming to regulations, and the section 61 is signed in the prescribed manner by both the debtor or hirer and by the creditor, will not be valid. You see, it's not a valid document unless it is signed. So even if they send it to you, a copy to you, because you haven't got a copy quite often, then in actual fact you've got to send that to you within 30 days. That's another very important point. Many of these organizations act mindlessly. They just send standard letters. They don't check up. And one of the things in the Act is that anybody who phones you, now that's the one thing I want to re-emphasize again, get yourself a recording device. And whenever a call comes in, do not take it unless that recording device is in place. You can get either a tape recorder, the old tape recorders, or you can get recording devices today that can record the conversation, and then you just download it into your computer, and then you can make a disc of it if you want to. So you can, it's very easy today. So do not take a call without a recording device. And I always advise them, always warn them. I sort of say, I am recording this. And then I've given you a whole list of questions that you must ask. Don't let them say, is that Mr. Jones? And you say yes, and then they start asking you questions first. You, in actual fact, must say, before we continue, I'm recording this, and in terms of the Act, clause number so-and-so, I have to ask you some questions. Now, what is your full name? And quite often they say Mary. You say, no, I've got to have your full name. In terms of the Act, it says you've got to give me the full name. And then you ask them what branch they're phoning from, or what telephone number they're at, or what the address of the branch is, and who their manager is, and what his telephone number is. And you want to know the license number, the CCA license number, the Consumer Credit Act license number that they operate under. And that usually takes another 10 minutes to find that. So you must get in control of the situation right from the word go. So if they phone you, that's right. They can't do that without answering questions. And then you've got to identify yourself. And then immediately say, fine, have you got my history file? Now they've got to have the history file if they phone you. It's against the law not to have the history file. They've got to have your full details. And I can tell you something, it's never happened. Never happened to me. And you say to them, well, I'm not prepared to go to discuss this until you get the history file. This account is in dispute, and in terms of the Act, you have got to have that history file in front of you, and I want to know why you haven't got it. Why haven't you got my history file? You know that's the law. And the first thing they want to do is get off the phone. They don't want to speak to you anymore because you're too abusive. They wanted to be abusive you and get the stick out. And this is like a dog going to get a stick and only find that stick gets up and whacks him instead. That's the fascinating part about this. Oh, and the Act, the section of the Consumer Credit Act that states that they've got to have the history file is under the physical and psychological harassment section, which says in 2.5 putting pressure on debtors or third parties is considered to be oppressive. In 2.6 examples of unfair practices. And then when you look at 2.6d, it says not ensuring that an adequate history of the debt is passed on as appropriate, resulting in repetitive and or frequent contact by different parties. In other words, there's supposed to be one party handling your file, not many parties. That's what it says there. So when you find that Mary phones and then a couple of days later Joe phones and then Harry phones and Peter phones, they don't all have the history file, as you can see, that's against the law. They're supposed to keep your private details when there's a dispute confidential, not handed out to the news of the world. Now, the banks rely a lot on you being ignorant of the law. That is a fact. And that is why they can get away with so much abuse. That is the fact of the matter. And you know that is against the law. It's against the law if you have a dispute. Now I was going to read you the pertinent clause. Under the heading Deceptive and Unfair Methods, it says in 2.7, dealings with debtors are not to be deceitful and or unfair. In 2.8, examples of unfair practices are as follows. But let me refer immediately to the unfair business and practices in section 2, and I'll just refer you to 2.2d says, leaving out or presenting information in such a way that it creates a false or misleading impression or exploits debtors' lack of knowledge. Lack of knowledge of what? The law. That's right. And so what they're doing is they lie to you, saying that they can collect this and they threaten you. That is misleading you, especially while there's a dispute going on. That's what we're talking about here, a dispute or a query. And they're not allowed to do these things. And that's what they're doing. They are acting like pinstriped mafia, because the mafia act outside the law. And then they have to sort it out themselves. That's why they've got all these hitmen. And these guys are doing exactly the same thing. And I don't mind telling them that. I've actually written to them and told them that. They're acting like pinstripe mafia. And they're acting outside of this very law. And they ignore it. Which, in the end is great, because in some of these files, they have broken the law repeatedly, hundreds of times on various sections of the law. Which, puts you in a very strong position to win any case against them if anything ever happens. But they're normally trying to ignore you. And especially, we now bring all the data protection stuff on them. That is another frightening thing. And, they're like ostriches. They don't like it. Only when they've got ignorant, frightened people are they in a strong position. But when they phone through and you say, before we go any further, before I identify who I am, and they're not allowed to speak to you unless you do, and you've got that recording going, you start asking all those questions, that puts you in a very strong position. Under section 2.3, under the heading False Representation of Authority and a Legal Position, in 2.3 it says, those contacting debtors must not be deceitful by misrepresenting their authority and or correct legal position. Now if they're threatening you, they're threatening visits and all that sort of thing, and you've got a query or a dispute on, and you've sent them recorded letters and they've got that, and sometimes they're even replying to you and saying they're investigating it, and they're handing you over there and threatening you and threatening to send people around to you, that is wrong. They're just not allowed to do it in terms of the Act. You got a dispute on, you got them. And incidentally, if they want to send around a visitor to come and visit you while there's a dispute going on, they've got to, in any event, have a court order with them. They can't just come. That is harassment, which is also seriously against the law. So, please understand, you're in a very, very strong position. And every time they do one action, it can break half a dozen others. That's why, you have this factor. Let's say you've got 10 demand letters sent to you while there is a dispute going on. It breaks all portions of the law, and so it sometimes that 6 letters is multiplied by 20 different sections of the law being broken, and plus the Consumer Credit Act is also broken. So you multiply that sometimes by 21, by 6, it's 126 times the law has been broken just by sending, those letters. So you've got to understand that you're getting in a far stronger position while they keep on breaking the law. Because immediately you let them know where you are and you give them their telephone number and give them times. That's another very important thing. Give them times that suit you, not them. They've got to be able to contact you. So you say, fine, you contact me between 9 and in the morning and 11 o'clock on Mondays and Thursdays. And you can give that, and they've got to abide by that in terms of the Act. So if they start phoning outside of that, which they always do, you take note of the time, you tell them they're breaking the law, you've got a recording of this, and once again, that's another breaking of the Act. That is against the law. There's a whole lot of other acts that have been broken as well, like the Data Protection Act, the fact that they're not allowed to phone you if there's a dispute going on. They're supposed to remain mum. Everything's supposed to be on hold. If they're charging you, all sorts of charges, etc., are supposed to be stopped as well. So it just is marvelous when you find a dispute. And you've got to be very creative in doing that and just making sure that you've got the right dispute there. As you see, my object here is not to teach you to break the law. What I'm doing is here, with these acts that you've got copies of, there it is there, that's one of them, and there's another one here which you'll have a copy of. All these are there to help you stay within the law. And as soon as you start operating within the law, guess what? They're operating without the law, because they act mindlessly. They push a button to send 10,000 letters out. Oh, but they shouldn't have sent it to you because you're on dispute. They push another button and they tell their hunting dogs to go and phone you. But they shouldn't have done that because actually you're in a dispute. And the more they do this, the stronger your position becomes. And in the end, you can tell them that they've broken the law. And under the penalties section, the penalties are pretty substantial. The company for every violation can be fined £50,000. And so can the staff who are doing it. So it makes them sort of think twice before they keep on breaking the law. So as I say, when I started this off, I said very clearly,
Don't be thrown to bits, but
one of the things you've got to be done is legal, as I keep on saying. And it's very difficult for them to remain legal because they have staff that are comparatively untrained. They don't seem to know anything about the Act. And what actually happens is they decide, for instance, say 20,000 copies out to all these people here. Get the demands out. But they're not supposed to sending it to you because you've got a dispute on. It's against the law. And they're also right saying they can't contact you when you've got a bevy of letters in your file proving they can, and probably been sending the telephone number. I always make sure that on the top I've got both my address and telephone number and email address, so they can never ever say that. And then they don't know what to say because they're not allowed to do that. And they often write saying, for instance, they are unable to send letters to us, or we're not replying. When I've got registered letters going off into the distance like machine gun bullets haven't been sold. And they don't know what to say when they hear all this, because they like to think that you're operating outside the law, then it gives them an excuse to continue on to the next stage. But suddenly they find that they can't do anything, and they don't like it. They really don't know what to do. They are useless at that. Coupled with the fact they don't ever reply. That's another big problem. You're supposed to reply 14 days or at least 30 days. They're supposed to have a reply, and they don't ever reply. They don't even take up your questions and answer them, which they're supposed to, which they're required to. I don't use the word supposed to. It's actually required to. They're required to do these things. Not just, they might answer if they want to. They're supposed to. They are required to. Then, of course, when they phone, they never have the history file. The person who's phoning comes through and says, is that Joe Bloke? And you say, who is speaking? This is Mary from XYZ Bank. Good. I'm recording this, Mary. Now, just before we go any further, we want to know exactly who you are. What is your full names, please? And so you continue from there. And you ask all those questions I've given you. But the very first thing you do straight after you get this letter and find, even if you haven't found a dispute, just send the letter saying you have got a dispute, and then within a day or two at the most, send them another recorded or special delivery letter with the full dispute in it that you've seen, announcing the dispute. Another thing they often do, and it's happened to me and others that I know of who have handled files, they in error make the mistake of sending it to Joe Little instead of Peter Little, for instance. All right? They're not allowed to do that. That's against the law. Data Protection Act, against the Consumer Credit Act, just absolutely against everything. They're not allowed to do that. The more they make this sort of thing, the weaker their case becomes, the further their potential for action by the government against them, with heavy fines. As a matter of fact, the more times they infringe, the stronger your case becomes. Can you imagine standing in front of the judge with all this evidence in front of you? Plus having an agreement, a credit agreement, that it hasn't been executed properly, which seems to be in just about every case I've looked at for myself and other people. They very rarely have a properly executed credit agreement. And you know, if they don't have a properly constituted credit agreement, the agreement is null and void. The debt is uncollectible. Then the next stage comes where they won't speak to you, they won't phone you, they won't write to you, because each time they write they seem to break the law, and then they start shutting up. But you know, the thing is that you want to go on to the next stage and get them to write off the debt and start paying you back what they owe you. And you know, that is the very next stage of the act. You just become in a very strong position. But you've got to create the file. You open that file up and you start putting everything inside. You get some of these split pins and drill some holes in the back, put the split pins through, drill holes, get a punch holes in the letters and everything that you receive, keep them in date order and keep them like that, because that is your records. And without those records you can't win. It's just that simple. So you've got to have those records. Just to quickly revisit, what sort of disputes can you have? Well, overcharging interest. You know, I have yet to find a credit agreement where the interest is not, or is correct rather. Sometimes they're £5 over, sometimes they're as many as £20 over on interest. And you know, every compound calculation is just a simple interest calculation. So if you have £100 and there's 10% interest on it, for instance, then that's 100 plus 10% is 110. And the very next month they compound it by adding it's 110 now. Now they add 10% onto that. I'm just doing this as a simple calculation. So now it's 110 plus 10%, which then means it's £121 compounded. But each calculation individually is just a simple interest calculation. And you can get that on spreadsheets, etc. If you want us to do it, we will charge you for it, but we'll do the calculation on your bill. But there will be a charge for that, please understand. And it's a charge in advance. But if you can't do it yourself, we will check it out. Thank you. Then of course you've got PPI, which is Payment Protection Insurance, which over the years they've just applied this willy-nilly without sort of saying, oh well, your account is protected. They don't tell you all the details and etc. They've never done that. And if they have said they've done that, well, they've got to have a recording, because they say they record these things. And their word's as good as yours. They say that they did it. You said they didn't. You've never received the documents if you haven't received the documents. I've very rarely got in the file any of the documents pertaining to any of these insurances. So we recovered a lot of those PPIs. Overcharges in the form of, say, penalties. They may have charged you in penalties. And so, you know, there's a lot of various ways, but make yourself sure you are legal and get that dispute. There are many disputes. And also ask, please don't forget to ask for a copy of your credit agreement. They don't like sending it, and they're supposed to reply within 30 days. I've had yet them to, well, actually they're required to reply within 30 days. Not supposed to, they're required to reply in 30 days. Most of the time they only reply in 72 days, and then the thing that arrives has not been countersigned by their staff at the time. And nobody wants to be for perjury or whatever it is, fraud, by signing it at such a late stage. So they send it to you with no counter signature, which in terms of clause 61 says that they've got to sign it. Even if you sign it, they've got to sign it to say they've accepted it. And the last thing is I want to mention to you is always, always record. Get yourself a recording device, whether it is a tape recorder or it's one of these new things that you can record it like a stick of a telephone, got a special attachment telephone, and you can put it on your computer, and then you can burn a disc from it or whatever you're going to do. But keep those things in your file, or put them in a certain part of the computer. Computers worry me. Computers go down, then you've lost your record. So may I suggest that you get some CDs or DVDs and you record those things onto that and then keep those in the file. It's worth it. It really is worth it, so that you've got a continuous file of what's been going on. Just don't keep everything on the computer, because these things go down. And I know it. I've lost so many records in the past. And you know, a record being lost like that can cost you maybe £10,000 on a PPI, even if it's only £1,000. To buy a disc for 22 pence and burn it on your hard drive over there is quite easy. So record all conversations. You don't really have to let them know, but I always do, because I want it to be absolutely, I don't want them to ever say that I did everything illegally. I just want to be completely legal, because it's far better than being illegal, because the law is so far on your side if they break the law. All businesses and everything, you must run this like a business. Keep and get every piece of information. If you're a bad administrator, get your husband to do it. If he's a bad administrator, get your wife to do it. I couldn't care which way you do it, but get somebody to get your files together and be meticulous about keeping this together, so that you've got an accurate record of everything that happens. All the letters that have been sent in the past, put them in the file. Don't throw them away. That is your evidence. But also make sure that you've got that dispute on, especially from that moment you've got the dispute on. Don't worry so much about what happened in the past. Let's get the dispute going, and then from that moment on, everything is illegal. That they send to you, demand from you, phone you about, etc., because it's supposed to be on hold, and everything they charge you, etc., can also be illegal. So anyway, I just thought I'd go through these things, and I think that you'll find that once you get into this, it will turn a horror into some fun, because you know that you are in charge. That's right. You are in charge. Nobody else is in charge. You're in charge of this situation. Thank you very much for listening, and get everything out. Get that letter out quickly. Bye.